Hey, Mike here at the Omni Austin Hotel. Of course, South by Southwest is going on. With me is Austin's newest Canadian resident, country singer Whitney Rose. Originally from Prince Edward Island, moved to Toronto, and I think fairly recently moved to Austin, the center of the musical universe this week. But Whitney,
Most of the time, I think.
being kind of a hometown show for you nowadays, how's the festival going so far? Are you enjoying, I guess, what Austin becomes during this week?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the city's a little nuts. Traffic is already kind of crazy in Austin, so that part of it has been something. But I got to play at the Broken Spoke yesterday, so, it like standing where Willie stands, or has stood so many times, and still does from time to time. So yeah, I've only really done one show, but it's been magical already, and there's much more to come. So I'm just kind of bracing myself.
Had you been to South by Southwest before this year?
No. When I moved here, I'd never been here before.
Wow. So I knew, like I said in the intro, you're from Prince Edward Island. I knew you'd moved to Toronto. Really, frankly, just overheard you say that you are now living here. When did that happen, and why Austin and not the, I guess, obvious country center of Nashville?
I had heard a lot of good things about Austin, and I followed some Austin musicians, and there was something really special about the sound of what people were doing here, and so I was really drawn to it. And I had been to Nashville a few times prior, and I really liked Nashville, but I thought I would take my chances with Austin instead, and I'm really glad that I did.
And before we get into the music in your album, which Heartbreaker of the Year, by the way, came out, I believe, about a year ago, and has been making huge waves in the country community. But just first, while we're on the topic of Austin, I know in Canada right now, through Music Canada's initiatives at the upcoming Canadian Music Week, there is a Music City Summit and that kind of thing. There's a lot of talk within the industry about this concept of music cities. And Austin is always kind of held up as the pinnacle or the role model of what cities can do if they really embrace the economic and cultural benefits of music and the music industry. So now having the insider perspective of living in Austin, but the outsider's perspective of not having grown up in Austin, how do you feel? Is the hype, I guess, warranted? On a week like today or this week, the entire music universe has its attention paid on Austin, but on a more average week, as a musician, how do you feel that Austin supports musicians? Is it what it's made out to be?
Well, yeah. I mean, the only reason why it's possible for Austin to have such a thriving musical community is because of the people who come out to see music, and people in Austin, people in Texas generally. I just played in Houston and Dallas for the first time, and they were both really wonderful shows. Texans like live music, and they support live music, and so that is what really makes a scene like this possible. And I think that has a lot to do with the two-stepping, which I am just so in love with. I could go out, 7 nights a week and just sit there and watch couples, of every age, like floating across the floor. It's my favorite thing to do, and they just love it. And and so you have to always be grateful for them and what they do and what they make possible. And then the music is pretty okay too, I think.
Yeah, no kidding. Speaking of the music, your own sound, it's, I guess you could almost describe it as, in the most positive way, like unapologetically country. It's bringing country back to that kind of old school roots and away from this kind of rock and pop inflected country that's been so common on radio over the last, number of years. I guess, is that an indicator of your own influences? Like, what did you listen to growing up? Was it that outlaw country that it seems?
Yeah, so I grew up on PEI with my grandparents and my mom, and my mom was pretty young when she had me, and so she, was listening to the popular music of the day, like Paula Abdul and stuff like that. And my grandparents, country folk, and they listened to George Jones and Keith Whitley and Hank Williams, a lot of Johnny Cash. My pop was a very big fan of Johnny Cash. And so I kind of had access to these two really different worlds of music, and I despised what my mother was playing, and I always just wanted to listen to what my grandparents were playing. And so that is kind of, I come by it fairly honestly, I guess. But I'm also just a big supporter of simplicity in all of its forms, and I think that there's a very wonderful beauty to simplicity, and that's why I try to exercise it whenever I can.
The timing of your record and you kind of emerging on the scene seems to be well timed. With, you look at what's going on in country music right now, where you have people like Chris Stapleton, Sturgill Simpson, Casey Musgraves up in Canada. Corb Lund's doing his bit to kind of bring back that outlaw country sound. Like, do you have a sense or maybe a theory as to why now, as far as, I guess, fans in the industry kind of embracing this renaissance of old school country versus this pop country that had become so ubiquitous?
Well, I don't know. I don't really know a lot about the new country music scene because I don't listen to it, and so I can't really say anything about it. Because I think it'd be tacky to talk about it when I literally know nothing. But it could be just because it got to a point where it was just so far gone, because it started to change in the 80s and 90s, like even what Rodney Crowell was doing, what Shania Twain was doing, like it was just like one step further, and now it's kind of just getting, I was going to say out of hand, but but I think that people miss it, because if you are a country music fan, you want to be able to, put on a record that wasn't made 50 years ago and still have it be a country record, which it's, getting to that point. So I think that resurgence is just, for lack of a better words, a longing from the people, or I hope anyway.
There's a soulfulness to it that people are just connecting with that they realize they missed, but that's just my own idea. But for you, for your second record that has really launched you up to another plateau, like I said, it's called Heartbreaker of the Year. You recorded it with Raul Malo, and I'd read that you guys recorded in just 4 days in Toronto. Was that like an artistic decision that you wanted that intensity, or was that just by necessity?
No, yeah, it was, as most decisions are made in this industry, it was financial. It was also just kind of lucky because the guys, they had a date in Canada and then 4 days off. It was actually on my island. It was Cavendish Beach. They were supposed to play. So they were there, and then they had 4 days off, and then they were playing in Ottawa. And so we took them to Toronto instead of them going home. And we just hammered it out. And then we had Raul fly back the following month to, do some final touches, because he sings on a lot of the record too. And so it was kind of done in 4 days, but we were getting all the fancy stuff done a little later. So, but it was, if you're going to make a record in 4 days, those are the guys you want to do it with, I think.
I'd heard you say before that part of the reason that you came down to Austin, like we were just talking about, was that the album did, I guess, better in the U.S. than it did in Canada. Maybe was that unexpected? Did that kind of change your plans?
Absolutely, because I had never even played in the States until this past September, and so when I've been touring Canada for a few years now, I guess since 2013, and so you expect to build up a little bit of a fan base at that point, and so that's why I expected that the record would do better in Canada, but it did not, which I'll try harder with my next one, I guess.
I would guess that's actually, if you have to choose between one or the other, so many Canadian bands, they break in Canada for obvious reasons, and then the US is the very tough nut to crack. So for you to kind of get that big nut cracked unexpectedly is probably a good position to be in.
The opposite, I guess. But it's also really tough as a Canadian musician, breaking out of Canada, just because it's expensive. It costs money to play outside of your own country, which is too bad, but it's entirely understandable why, if you can establish yourself in Canada and, just cover that circuit, absolutely. But I'm really grateful too, because it's a really beautiful way to get to see new places. Like, as I said, I had never even been to Texas before I moved here. And I've never been to Europe, but next year it looks like we're going to be doing a European run, and so it's a very beautiful thing to be able to see new places through what you do, and I'm very grateful for that.
Fantastic. And just before we wrap up here, it's been about a year since Heartbreaker of the Year came out. Just any plans as of yet as far as new material? Do you know when a follow-up will be if fans are waiting?
Yeah. I just signed with 6 Shooter Records, and so I essentially, as soon as I'm allowed to stay in one place for more than a week, I will be making a new album. I'm playing in Nashville next week, and so I'm gonna stick around a few extra days and attempt at some co-writing with Raul, who produced the last one, and we're hoping to be in the studio by no later than July.
Fantastic. Well, keep an eye out for that in the coming months, but in the meantime, pick up Heartbreaker of the Year. Fantastic album by Canada's own, now Austin's Whitney Rose and Whitney. Just on loan. There you go. But Whitney, I know this must be a super busy week for you, but thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you
Cheers.
for having me.
Thank you.